every time. Until sometimes when you have you're counting down and you're like, oh, that's always a bummer. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I see your table is starting to represent here. We got Earl. I haven't met the gentleman next to Earl yet. Thank you as well. Of course, I'm going to need Gary Moon. I'm not sure I see Gary back in here yet. And it's cold in here. It is cold. That's why today I brought an extra coat and then an overcoat. I thought it was so cold. There's Gary. It's all right. It's all right. It gave plenty of time for everybody to come back in. All right. Okay, so if you recall, we are going to do a recap of the exercise, and Gary's going to walk through and come and get some feedback from the audience about what they thought about this. So I'm going to leave that up to you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is really your session to talk to each other about what's happened over the last couple of days and put it in the context of this sort of incident, I suppose, or these two incidents. I'm just going to quickly read the first paragraph of both of the incidents so that you all know what the other incident was really around. So, I'll start with scenario 1 if I can find it. Scenario 1 was on August 20th, 2015, at approximately 1936 hours, an outgoing worker was injured while being lowered by a crane on a personal transfer basket onto a vessel. As the personal transfer basket was being lowered, a sea swell caused the vessel to rise and contact the personnel basket. Two workers being lowered observed the vessel rising, and in an attempt to avoid the impact, they both tried to jump immediately prior to the contact. The second worker was not injured during the incident. So that was incident number 1. So many of you won't have had that. Incident 2 was on August 21st, 2015, while the crew of an offshore facility was in the process of removing drill pipe from the well, an undetected influx of hydrocarbons escalated to a loss of well control and blowout event. Attempts to control the well with the blowout preventer were unsuccessful and the rig was abandoned. The natural gas flow from the blowout continued to flow and eventually ignited. The flow of gas ultimately ceased as a result of natural accumulation of sediment inside the well. As a result of the incident, personnel were injured, pollution occurred, natural resources were lost, and the rig was severely damaged. Now, so they're the two incidents that on the face of it don't seem very similar at all. I suppose the starting point is, I'm going to try and get you talking to each other about these incidents, is for the ones you were looking at, with the benefit of hindsight, what might an operator or regulator identify as contributing factors to the incidents? Has anyone got any comments on that, any tables? If we start with scenario 1, anyone who had scenario 1, which was the transfer basket? Come on. There are some people, aren't there? I'm going to move around, I think. Who had 1? I think these all had 2. Table 22 did have... OK, table 22. Brilliant, brilliant. OK. So what did you think were the contributing factors?
Well, first of all, you know, they knew the vessel was moving quite a bit, and actually the captain, it seemed like, made a comment that he wasn't comfortable about coming near the facility to make the transfer.
Okay.
So that was one issue. Another issue was really the threat from the operator to the vessel saying, well, if you don't do the job, we can find somebody else who will.
Okay. What does that say about the culture?
There was no culture.
Yeah, it wasn't very good. Anyone else who had scenario 1 have anything different? Scenario 1. I'm gonna... Here. Did I see a wave? I did. Okay, okay. Oh, sorry, okay, we'll go over. God, they're going to keep me fit walking backwards. And...
We're going to make you run it back.
Yeah, then the next table will be over there.
Yeah, the operator was unwilling to defer to expertise was one issue. And I think they did rely too much on past successes. We heard the other speaker talk about success can be a liability.
Yep.
In this particular case, it was. There were insufficient barrier systems and improper equipment to perform the job, and inability to communicate. And there was no mention of a JSA where people talk about, what is the worst thing that can happen, and what are we going to do to prevent or mitigate it from happening.
Any other sort of things that tell you that there was something wrong with the culture? Something wrong with the culture, the sort of the safety culture that they had on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and again, when you think about it, on a offshore drilling rig, the OIM is typically in charge for the safety of the people on board that vessel.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't to call that company man to tell them to do what they did. And so there's a communication at a hierarchy that isn't happening. That's a cultural issue.
Complacency, really.
Yeah, and there was complacency involved.
Good. Okay. I think the defer to expertise is particularly important on that. And if you looked at the high reliability organisation stuff, one of the aspects of high reliable organisations is they do defer to expertise. And I think that was key within that. That's a good spot. We're going to move to scenario 2 now. So who has done scenario 2?
Right over here, Garrett.
Oh, there's a...
So there's a whole host of contributing factors, but a lot of it came down to risk assessment. So either not doing it well or not doing it proper. There's not enough information to know if the company there was it an operational discipline issue where the design of the process was done well but not executed, or was there a larger systemic issue around the design of something to help the people have the proper amount of risk assessment and perceive the risk in a proper way.
Okay.
Also, there was some issue around kind of clarity of the control management authority, who's in charge, who's the ultimate person in charge and responsible for ensuring the right decisions got made.
Good. Okay. No, the other question that I'd like you to try and answer is sort of what were the cultural aspects that you felt stood out for you on that?
So a lot of it, again, is higher tolerance for abnormal operations or for unusual operations. So it seemed from the reading that there was a little bit of a focus on the business continuing to pull pipe even while you're losing completion fluid, et cetera. And a culture of maybe getting it done versus stopping and thinking and saying, oh, there's something unusual. Can we tolerate this abnormal or this outside of normal operating envelopes? And a little bit of a lack of focus on details. Equipment wasn't working. Alarms weren't responding. Did anybody know? Was anybody aware? Were there alternatives? So kind of losing focus on some of those early indicators.
See, because that to me, when I first read that, it was really around complacency. The routine operation is particularly a bit of a giveaway that when people think something is routine, that their guard drops. And that's why there's so many incidents around routine operations. We generally, when we're doing complicated operations, we spend more time planning. I suppose the other part of that is the planning element that was raised. Is this a scenario 2 picture table?
I was going to say, who wants to take it?
I'll take it. Ante friends with NAM in the Netherlands. I think one of the cultural contributions was the not wearing of PPE. And, well, with a little bit of insight, we understand this was playing in the Gulf of Mexico, where I think there is also a cultural setting that you don't wear PPE on a helicopter. So when you go to work, the survival suits, which like in other places around the world are always on from the whole mindset. If it's too hot, you don't have to wear your protective equipment like a survival suit. That culture may have actually been then established silently on the platform. It was maybe too hot, and working with zinc bromide, which is of course very dangerous. Good to play with. So I think there's an underlying cultural thing there.
Brilliant. first.
Yes, as a non-technical person in the group, I do know, I have a background as a geochemist, so I know what zinc bromide is, and the thought that people were using zinc bromide without wearing protective gear. As a non-technical person in terms of understanding what was going on in the drilling, I would have been, this is not good. There's something fundamentally wrong with the setup here.
So there's the awareness element, isn't there? The risk awareness that sticks out as well. Good. Has anyone, as a regulator, had to deal with any situations like that they would like to share, and what they would actually try and do about those situations? Yep.
I'd just like to add something on this one, in that in this situation, it would appear that from the beginning there was a problem, in that this is a completion. They're not drilling a well, and this is a drilling crew, but they're expected to perform completions. But in this case, the calculation for the zinc bromide, your kill weight fluid, was not done correctly. Okay. And although it appears to document that the training was compliant with the regulations, this exact example is a test question in the workover supplement in IADC's improved well training course that you have to get recertified for every 2 years. So, I think there's still a question as to, was this a training issue? Was someone actually trained to do the calculation? If they were, then it's clearly human error. But there may still be a training issue on that. Was there someone on the rig that actually knew that this was to be done? And if so, then it was just human error. Someone, and their procedure did not account for checking it. But then clearly the monitoring of the trip tank, that's also part of that testing procedure and the training. But you expect someone to know to do that, even if you haven't had your training in the last 2 years. That's an expectation.
I think you've hit on a couple of really good points there. I think one of them is about compliance. So all of that big second paragraph is around actually they were, complying with certain elements. And I suppose that's the problem with, or not the problem with regulations, but you can comply, but you don't necessarily get the intent across, which is what I was talking about in my presentation, which is how you go about doing things. The other part that stood out for me on that was the planning element, the fact that when it all went wrong, no one had gone, actually, how are we going to react to it, the emergency response plan, and that's what really stood out to me. Thank you. So, have we got a...
Yeah, I think as a regulator, we have looked at this kind of situation with to look at the barrier, and the barrier either missing or that is weak, and try to challenge and be very specific towards the companies to what do they have in place to be sure that they know their barriers and that they are strong and function, and not only look at the people offshore in the sharp end. This is the whole organization. It's a lot of things happening onshore, a lot of things happening with the planning onshore, with the management onshore. So actually looking at the whole system that they have in place to ensure that they have barriers to avoid this kind of things happening. So we have had a lot of audit activities and verification activities to actually look at how does the companies ensure they have barriers in place.
Okay. Did anyone have any comments on the fact that they noticed things weren't going well, but they carried on?
Yeah, I just think that details matter. I think we said that before, so I'd want to know more details, because my view is certainly the one barrier was degraded, and they made a decision to go ahead and keep on pulling pipe. I'm not sure that, just like the boat that was trying to outrun Hurricane Joaquin, did they try to, with the seepage losses still going on, did they try to trip out of the hole and then beat that loss? So I would want to know more information.
I think that's really important. I think that when you look at the information in here, it doesn't tell you why people did what they did. And it goes back to that element on the difference between climate and culture. And the culture element is why. Why did they notice something going wrong and came up with the conclusion that actually it will be all right? What gave them that? Because was it a pressure element? Was there something they needed to carry on doing? Exactly the same with the boat transfer. Why was the need to make that boat transfer when the conditions were borderline? Yeah, they were compliant with the conditions. But I suppose these are things as regulators where you look at it and you go, yeah, everything's in that box that we've said is acceptable. But there's that element that falls outside of that. And it's, I suppose the challenge for regulators is deciding whether that bit that falls outside of that box is acceptable. Any comments on how you can, so for people that have had similar incidents, that how they've had to deal with these?
So I was just going to say, Fraser Weir, Netherlands Oil and Gas Producers Association. When I read it, and I'm not a driller, more operational background, yes, it's obviously important whether they did the calculations, didn't do it, but the thing that jumped out was more that every single piece of equipment which could have helped them failed.
Yeah.
So what those pieces of equipment for, even to the point where when they launched the lifeboat, it got stuck on a piece of ladder. So they hadn't bothered to check the design of the rig. The rig was basically not designed properly. So everything there, which could have helped them, whether or not they did the calculation, failed. So again, we don't know the culture there, but it suggests that the culture was pretty much broken throughout. So if I was a regulator in this case, I'd be more worried about those failures than the calculation, to be honest, because it meant that everything wasn't working.
And how would you check that? What would tell you from a sort of, when we talk about artifacts, talking about things, tangible things in the system, what would you go and look at to determine the maintenance aspect?
So I want to see that if they've got safety critical equipment, that they've been testing them. How often do they test them? Do they have procedures for testing them? Have they tested them? Can you show me when was your last test? Or did they pass or fail? How often do you have deviations from those things? Because you get the sense if you've got BOPs that don't work, you've got flow valves that don't, flow measurements, beg your pardon, which is a critical thing on a drilling rig, I believe, that they didn't work, and you don't even know if your lifeboat works. Now, then what are you doing operating that rig? Whether or not you have a blowout situation, you're already in a bad place.
Okay. And I suppose that it's a very good point, because you could change and you could turn around to that organisation and you could say, okay, what we want you to do is make sure you do all of this testing and monitoring. But have you solved the root cause? Have you solved the reason why it wasn't done by doing that? It's the why, isn't it? It's that why. It's that cultural why that sits at the back. Wasn't there funding for it? Was there time pressure? Why didn't it happen? And for me, when I do sort of my investigations and my analysis, that's the bit I'm really trying to get to. I want to know what the driver of that thing not happening or being managed. So you look for the artifacts, but you need to know why. And that was what I was trying to explain about the difference between climate and culture. One of them tells you what people think. The other bit of it is why they think it, and the why is much more important, mainly because the why tells you what to do and what needs changing. Are there any other comments? There's got to be more comments out. Oh,
So AJ Chevron. So one thing I would ask the regulators in this room then to consider is there's a lot of different things you could do. Question 5, what are some of the examples and strategies? But one of the things I'd say is focus on understanding and strengthening the barriers. There's a real response when something major happens, that we have a real public outcry. What else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? What additional requirements are you going to impose? And I would say that in many cases, additional requirements does not equal additional safety. And so to focus again on really understanding the details and getting an idea of what are the barriers in place. In this example, I can add the zinc bromide example. I could add 2 more barriers. I could say, a gentleman's sole job is to monitor the tank. But what if he was in the bathroom in this example?
Yeah.
And so I could continue to add barriers, but they would continue to fail. So to Fraser's point, it's really around what are the systems, or as an operator, I'm much more focused on making sure that what I have in place works. And imposing additional requirements sometimes then almost I have $100 to spend, and now I have to take away 10 from this barrier to spend 10 on that barrier, are either going to be stronger.
No, that's it.
So I would leave you regulators in the room with that thought that sometimes they're warranted, but oftentimes understanding what failed and fixing what failed is more powerful than saying, here's another barrier.
I was just going to follow up with that, but yeah, we'll come to you next. It's an interesting one because there is a public pressure on regulators to do something, and following an incident coming out and saying, well, actually, if they'd done what they were meant to do, it would have been okay. That's not necessarily what the public wants to hear. They want to say, well, actually, they need to do something different, because different in a lot of people's heads is better. I think that's the real problem that I think regulators have to deal with.
I would like to add that in this instance, you don't really even need additional regulations, but if you properly fund the regulator, and the regulator can take that training like we're able to take now. We actually had at least 4 inspectors this year take this course that better understand well control training now. And even before our SEMS requirement, we had a training requirement where we can assess both production and the well operation side whether people have the proper training. So I guarantee you now those 4 inspectors that took this training, they have a much better idea of the questions to ask and what to look for when they're on a drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And it didn't need new regulations, it just needed to properly fund the regulator in an improved training program, I think.
Okay.
Gary, we got one in the back here, other side.
Gert-Jan Winters from NOGEPA in the Netherlands. I want to respond on your remark that the government that they need to act when something happens, and I think that's also part of culture. If we see when Macondo happened, also around the North Sea, everybody started shouting, "Let's do something," while I think most of the people, of the inspectors or the government people, they said, "No, let's first wait till we know what has happened." And I think that has been a very good reaction and a very good cultural thing, that how you should deal with these things. Sometimes you got pressure, but act on the way you should do, and that's your responsibility, just like the captain on the ship we discussed in the first example.
Okay. I mean, I was, this is just as a sideline, but I was actually on Deepwater Horizon 4 weeks before it went down, doing a culture assessment. My report actually ended up on the front page of the New York Times, quotes taken out of context. I think this is the problem we have with regulators and the public, that when something happens, we do look to blame. And when we've been talking about culture for the last 2 days, really what we're talking about is blame. And we're trying to reduce blame from everywhere, so from internally in the organisation, so management. The question, and I don't expect an answer to this because I'm going to have to close it now, but the question is, how do we create a culture within a national culture, an international culture, where we actually seek learning, not blame? Because actually, we had, sorry, I can't remember the name, but the person up here who was a journalist saying, that's really what journalists want. My wife is a journalist. If it's not got a nice little tangible bit of juice in it, they're not interested. So that's the problem, I think. As someone that sits as a consultant, I'm trying to get my clients to learn as much as possible, inflate the risk, make people understand it, while on the other side we have a society that wants to make sure that everyone's doing everything exactly as it's meant to be done, and when it goes wrong, they want to shout about it. I think that's a really hard position to be in, and I'm glad I'm not in a regulator, to be honest. I think that's it. Thank you very much for that. I hope it was useful, and thanks to all of those of you that participated in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You did a great job. So on that, before we move into Earl, as he's coming up to the stage, I'm going to introduce him, but I did get a question from the audience, and we put it out earlier yesterday that if you had any questions you wanted to submit that we couldn't get to at various times, to submit a card. And this is kind of in the theme of what the gentleman from Chevron said about new barriers doesn't make better barriers, right? Okay. So there's this dialogue. It's not the specific comment that you're making, but that you expressed this. Okay. So this open dialogue between the regulated community and the regulator. So the comment is, I'm going to put this out for food for thought. Earl's going to talk, and then I'd love to get your thoughts in the wrap-up on how we can tackle this very important question. Okay. This forum is a great example of how regulators and industry come together to discuss ideas to improve safety. Totally agree with that. I work in an area, it's a regulator, and I've observed that if we were to take some of these ideas and use them to improve our standards, i.e. the regulations, okay, we wouldn't get the same thoughtful, cooperative response that we're doing here today, where we're all together. It turns more adversarial, okay, right away. So how can we together work on that relationship? I think that is the million-dollar question. So I want to set the stage. We're going to come back to that, because I would love to see this continue. And we try to do that here in the US with our rulemaking process, but it's difficult. You have to balance many, many interests. But other people here, there are a whole variety of regulators here. We have many from the various, some non-oil and gas regulators here in the US. We have a lot of international regulators. This is important for every single one of us in the room and all of the regulated communities. So think about that. How can we work on continuing this great dialogue outside of the room, all right, in the real world, in this relationship that we have together? Okay, so this is like the last part. Earl, you're going to bring it home. Earl Carnes. I have heard, Earl, I didn't tell you this. I've actually heard you speak numerous times around town. When you were still, before you'd retired, I'd heard you speak a couple of times, because for years I've been going to risk conferences in previous jobs as well. And so I have had the great pleasure of hearing you get excited about your topic before, so I knew you would be a good speaker here. So he's worked at the DOE. He is retired. Bless you. We'd all like to get there one day. And he was a senior advisor for high reliability and a liaison officer with the Institute of the Nuclear Power Operations. He has over 40 years of working in that sector, okay? Private and public. And this is notable, he was the winner of the Distinguished Career Service, which for a government employee in the US is pretty much the highest honor that you could get. So one other thing that I thought was really, really great, because I'm a geologist, and I've already admitted I like to kayak. We share that, okay? We share the kayaking, but also you learned how to cut gems from a mentor just for fun. I think that's pretty neat that you took that initiative, and you should teach me. Okay. Okay, all right, with that, come on up here. Let's hear.
You gotta love this town. Are we good on the volume? Yes. Are we? Okay, I never know. My ears are not as good as they used to be. I hung around submariners too long. You gotta love this town. They're wonderful people. There's certain areas I stay away from. It's kind of this hill out there, and it's got this big structure on it, Mr. Director, that you've been over there many times. I've been in this room for 37 years. I've heard the discussions that I've enjoyed the past 2 days for 37 years. Now, I don't know about you, but when you hear the same thing over and over and over again, what happens to me, maybe it's just me or maybe it's because I'm human, is I go, well, I've heard that before. And then I go, why am I sitting? My back gets kind of stiff and my neck. Now, I call that normal human behavior because, you know, the adrenaline sets in and things like that. And your mind does weird things. At least mine does. And what I found out, though, is that even though I've sat in this room many times for 37 years, if I can let that monkey mind, we call it sometimes, just go over here, and I can give you my attention, I can get a distinction from you that I haven't gotten before. Maybe I've even heard the same words, but I haven't heard it said exactly that way. I haven't heard exactly that same story that you've told to illustrate the same point that I've heard 1,000 times. And something will come over me. And there's actually a biophysical thing that's going on that, oh, my shoulders will, oh, I just got something from that. Okay? It happens. I have friends who study the physiology and the neurochemistry and all that. I don't know that stuff. I just know the people that know it, so I call them and ask them. I'd like to give you that gift. If you would like something like that, that's the end of the day, I'm going to invite you to do this. And that is very simply, I'm going to tell you this, that everything, just about everything I'm going to say has already been said in the past 2 days. Okay? And I'm going to ask you, invite you to predict to yourself what I'm going to say. Now, if you just have a glimpse in your mind of such a prediction, it will work. But it will work better if you actually jot down a phrase, a couple of words, or something like that of what your prediction is. I'm going to watch and see who's brave enough to actually write it down. You can receive a gift or not. It's up to you. And perhaps at the end, somebody might ask me why. I was invited, you can keep writing if you want to. I like these invitations. You don't have to send us a presentation, you just talk about what you want to. As the director said, to reflect simply from my worldview, my experience on, first of all, things that you have said, and to do it within the context of how I think about what I call strategic learning. It says organizational learning, some wonderful questions that were posed that informed my thinking. So that's what I want to attempt to do, and do that by maybe first establishing kind of a context. I want to reflect on a few things that I've heard. I actually, sat down last night and I typed out a page and a half of my 10 pages of notes and added some more stuff. There's no way I can cover all of them, so I'm going to tell you what I think that they mean. So I want to do a little bit of that because it's what it means to me. And then I want to kind of approach this idea of strategic learning. The term organizational learning has been used. I want to talk about strategic learning. Okay? And from the standpoint of the whole organization is important to me. I've been every place. I've been at the deck plate, okay, and I've been, heaven forbid, at headquarters. Okay, I've been a regulator. I've been an operator. I've been a manager. I've been a whatever. I was very fortunate, very early in my career, to have actually been in this world when 3 Mile Island happened. People say, gee, how'd you get the job? I say, by accident. It was actually true. It's not funny. Things happen to us in life, not by design, but by accident. Okay? And somehow I wound up at the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not. A lot of people talked about nuclear. And so it was simply put together by the CEOs, by the people who ran the nuclear utility business. Okay? The phrase was hostages of each other. Okay? Nobody can fail because it hurts everybody. You said the same thing about Macondo. And the whole purpose was to go out and look for the executives, not for the regulator, not for compliance, not for anything else like that. Go out and look. Okay. So I was this young kid, and I didn't come from the Navy. I had a degree in chemistry. I'd done a few things like that. And so somehow I was adopted. Not exactly my sea daddy, but he was my mentor. One of the people who crewed on the maiden voyage of the Nautilus, the first nuclear submarine in the world. He had 37 years Navy. He was captain of diesel boats. He was captain of nuclear submarines. He was Oars Board, okay? The On-Sea Reactor Safety Evaluation Board. You don't know when they're going to get there. They may show up at night. They may show up at base. They may show up at, on the ship, okay? You don't know when they're going to get there. But they work for the Rickover, the kindly old gentleman. The admiral knows what I'm talking about. He was a Hagen. But there are incredible things done, okay? This is the guy that somehow said, I want you to work for me. He said, I'm an evaluator of people. That's what I've done. That's how I've succeeded. He was the first team leader that INPO ever hired because the CEO of INPO had been the captain of the first nuclear submarine and the captain of the first nuclear surface ship, Dennis Wilkinson. I loved the guy. And this guy had worked for him. Okay? So he said, I want you on my team. I said, oh, okay. I don't know why. And he says, and not only that, you're going to help us look at organizations. I didn't have your background or so. Okay. Okay. Now, okay. Why did that happen? And this is all relevant. See, if you let it be relevant. I think it happened. See, I'll never know. But this is a story I tell myself. And the story doesn't have to be true. It only has to serve me in a positive way. Okay? I think the reason was that I was not acculturated as the sailors were that worked for them. I didn't know I was supposed to kowtow to the admiral. I'd say, Dennis, why is that? Dennis, that doesn't make any sense, because I was ignorant. See, I didn't know what I was supposed to know or how I was supposed to think. And I think that's why they wanted me there. You see, there's an important lesson. It's been touched on before by you. And you see, I noticed something in the wrap-up, okay, of the exercise. What I noticed was every one of you who was asked had a story to tell about what happened, about why it happened, and about what it might mean. Is that true? I mean, when I do investigations, I've done a lot of them. That's really my career, okay? I can't do an investigation in a few minutes. It takes me months if it's a big one, okay? Because the stuff, you know, just like you. Stuff that we run, if something goes, I mean, we could lose the state of Texas if something really bad goes wrong, okay? Because we also do nuclear defense in my other work, okay? So it takes a long time. This is very, very significant. But at the same time, there were things that you noticed that for some reason were signals that triggered something in your mental models that allowed you to say, I think